So you might remember from third, fourth, fifth grade, whenever you guys started working with fractions, that common denominators are really important. Like if I have something like this, 1/2 plus 3/5, we cannot add those together as they look right now because our denominators are not the same. So one really important thing that we need to know how to do is how to find a common denominator, and specifically a least common denominator. We want the least common denominator because it's going to make it a lot easier to work with. So in this section, we're not going to be adding or subtracting. All we're going to be doing is working on finding the least common denominator, and then kind of building up our fractions once we find that common denominator. So first, let's talk about the process to find the LCD, or least common denominator, of just integers, just numbers. So if we think of 8 and 6, when I say the least common denominator, think of your multiples. We're basically saying, what is the smallest number that both 8 and 6 will go into? So if we needed, we could make a list of multiples: 8, 16, 24, 32, 40, and so on. For 6, we have 6, 12, 18, 24, 30, and so on. And our least common denominator is going to be the smallest multiple that they both share, the smallest number that they both go into. So in this case, our LCD is 24. All right, so when we are finding the least common denominator of something that has some variables with exponents, so the first thing we're going to do, I'm going to give you little steps right here. The first thing we're going to do is find the LCD of our coefficients. So find the LCD of our coefficients, or our numbers. So let's do that first. We've got 4 and 6. So if we think of the multiples of 4, 4, 8, 12, 16. If we think of the multiples of 6, 6, 12, 18. Well, they share 24. The smallest one that they both go into is 12. They also share 24, but that's not our least common denominator. And then when we're looking at our variables, so first we find the least common denominator of coefficients. Then we're going to use, use the variables with the highest power. Okay, so if we look at our x's, I've got x squared and x to the fourth. So we're going to use the x to the fourth. And the reason for that is we can add more to this one. We can multiply this term by some more to have them be the same. We cannot take any away from here. So then if we do the same thing for our y's, y to the fifth, y to the third, we're going to use y to the fifth. And for our z's, this one doesn't have any z. This one has z to the sixth, so we're going to use z to the sixth. So that's how we find our least common denominator when we have variables with powers. We find our number like normal, the smallest number that they both go into, and then we're going to use the highest value of exponents. So 12, x to the fourth, y to the fifth, z to the sixth. Okay, so when we are trying to find the least common denominator of polynomials, I have a trinomial right here, a trinomial right here. What we're going to need to do here is we're going to need to factor first. So let's factor first. This one right here is going to turn into, we need two numbers that multiply to give me this, add to give me this. So x plus 3 and x minus 1. Multiply to give me negative 12, add to give me negative 1. We're going to have x minus 4, x plus 3. Okay, so we're going to factor first, and then we're going to identify all the factors needed. All right, so let's look here. They both have an x plus 3. So let's see, our least common denominator. They both have an x plus 3, so that's going to be in our common denominator. Well, this one has an x minus 1, and this one has an x minus 4. So it has to include all the different factors from each of our polynomials. And notice here, I only wrote x plus 3 once because they both already have that. So x plus 3, x minus 1, x minus 4. Alrighty, and then our last one here, same thing, let's factor. This one right here, multiply to give me 25, add to give me negative 10. We've got x minus 5 times x minus 5, or x minus 5 squared. You can write it either way. Multiply to give me 45, add to give me 14. We're going to have x minus 9, x minus 5. Okay, so let's think about this. This one has 2x minus 5, so we need 2 of those. You can write it as x minus 5 times x minus 5, or x minus 5 squared. And then this one already has 1 of those x minus 5, so we don't need to write that again. But we do need to include this factor, x minus 9. So again, our least common denominator needs to have all of the factors that each of them contain. And in this case, we had to have squared because this one had 2 of them, so we need to include both of those. All right, so on this next group here, it says once we know the least common denominator, what we're going to use that for is we're going to build up some fractions so that they have matching denominators. And we're going to use that in the next section when we start adding and subtracting those. So in this lesson, we're not going to actually be doing the adding and subtracting. We're just going to work on building up fractions so that they do have common denominators. All right, let's refresh, think back to 3rd or 4th grade. If I have 1/2 plus 1/5, if I want to write these with common denominators, all right, well, let's think of the least common denominator of 2 and 5. They both go into 10. And then really what we have to do next is we have to say, okay, what did we multiply 2 by to get to 10? Well, we multiplied it by 5, so we do the same thing on the top and bottom. So we have 5 over 10. For this next one, we multiplied it by 2, so we do that on the top and bottom. So plus 2 over 10. So now we do have common denominators. Now we can add these if we wanted to. So on these first couple here, I gave you a fraction, and I gave you what we want our denominator to be. So we're just saying now, how do we need to change the numerator? Excuse me. How do we need to change the numerator so that now we have matching fractions? So let's look first at our denominators. We want to see how did we go from here to here? What did we multiply this by? Well, we multiplied our 3 times 2 to get 6. We started out with a squared. We got a to the 5th, so we multiplied it by a to the 3rd. We started out with b to the 1st. We ended up with b to the 3rd, so we multiply it by b cubed. Sorry, I kind of ran out of room here. So whatever we multiply the bottom by, we're going to do the same thing to the top. 2a cubed b squared. All right, so let's multiply our numerators here. Let's multiply this thing by this thing. So 2 times 5 gives me 10. A cubed times a gives me a to the 4th. There's nothing to multiply that b squared with, so we just have b squared. So our question mark, this value right here, is really 10 a to the 4th b squared. All right, and then our last one here, if we're trying to find this missing piece, let's factor this trinomial first. This factors to be x plus 4, x plus 3. So now let's see how we went from this fraction to this fraction. Well, it already has an x plus 4, so it's just missing this x plus 3. So I'm going to multiply it by x plus 3. If we do it on the bottom, we need to do it on the top. So our denominator is that common denominator, x plus 4, x plus 3. And then our numerator, we can distribute this. Once we do that and simplify, I'm going to end up with x squared. Let's see, minus 2x plus 3x is going to give me plus 1x. 3 times negative 2 is going to give me negative 6. And notice I left the denominator factored. I multiplied the numerator. That's because in the next section, we're going to want to leave it like that. We're going to want to leave it with our denominators factored, our numerators multiplied out so that we can add and subtract our numerators. All right, and so this last section is kind of combining what we've done. Now I give you 2 fractions. We've got a fraction here, And we're going to try to build up each fraction so that they have a common denominator, kind of like what we did with this 1/2 and 1/5 at the top. So the first thing we're going to need to do is identify our least common denominator. I'm going to go ahead and draw two fractions here. Here's our first one. Here's our second one. And let's look at our denominators to find our least common denominator. We start with our numbers. Least common denominator of 4 and 6 is 12. We saw that one earlier. Let's see, this one has an a squared, this one doesn't. So we go with the one with the highest power. They both need to have a squared. This one has b to the first, b to the third. We go with the highest power, b to the third. This one has a c, this one doesn't. We go with the highest power, so c to the first. All right, now let me clean this up a little bit, and let's see what we did to change each fraction to have this denominator. So for my first one, let's think about what we multiplied by. We started out with 4, we ended up with 12, so we multiplied by a 3. We started out with b cubed, we ended up with b cubed, that's okay. Started out with c, ended up with c, that's okay. But we're missing an a squared, so I need to multiply it by a squared. So do the top and the bottom the same, 3a squared on top, 3a squared on bottom. So my numerator changes to be 15 a to the third. All right, let's see how we multiplied, or let's see what we multiplied this second one by to go from 6a squared b to this denominator right here. All right, to get from 6 to 12, we multiplied by 2. A squared, this already has an a squared. This has b to the first, we need b to the third, so I'm going to multiply it by b squared. This doesn't have a c, we need a c, so I'm going to multiply it by c. So we multiply the top and bottom by 2b squared c. So our second fraction turns into 3 times 2 is 6, b squared, c squared. So we've built these fractions up so that now we do have a common denominator, and it's our least common denominator. And then next unit, we'll go ahead and do some math with that. We'll be adding them or subtracting them. All right, and one more where we have trinomials in our denominator. So I'm just going to rewrite these in factored form. That's going to help us find our least common denominator. Okay, so multiply to give me -6, add to give me -5. I'm going to rewrite this as x minus 6, x plus 1. Multiply to give me 3, add to give me 4. I've got x plus 3, x plus 1. And I just crossed those out so I don't get confused. We didn't change anything about them, we just rewrote them differently. All right, so now let's decide. I'm going to draw some big fractions here. Let's decide what factors we need in our common denominator. Well, they both have an x plus 1, so that's definitely one of our factors. This one has an x minus 6, so we need that. This one has an x plus 3, so we also need that. Okay, so our common denominators have 3 parts, 3 binomial factors. So let's see what we do to change our numerator now. All right, this first one already has an x plus 6, already has an x plus 1, but we need this x plus 3. So I'm going to multiply the top and bottom by x plus 3. If we multiply our top by that, 5x times x is 5x squared. 5x times 3 is 15x. So now we've built up that first fraction to have a common denominator. So our second one, look, this one has an x plus 3, an x plus 1, but we're missing this x minus 6. So I'm going to multiply our top and bottom by x minus 6. Okay, so on top, it's like we're distributing that. I'm going to kind of do part of it in my head. X times x is x squared. We have negative 6x minus 2 more x's, so negative 8x. Negative 2 times negative 6 is positive 12. All right, so we now have built them up where they have a common denominator right here and right here, and we've changed our numerators so that they match. Then the next section, we will be using that to help us add and subtract with those common denominators.